Mandy Daniel, and I'm your host for today's session. And for those of you that aren't familiar with us, RDS has over 100 years of experience working with AppEnhancer. We assist clients with first-line support, implementation, custom development, data migrations, and business process consulting. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We're going to be sending out the recording to everyone when the session is over, so you can focus on the content that the team's presenting today and you don't have to worry about taking notes during the session. If you do have any questions during the session, we're going to get to all those at the end of the session. So you can enter those in the Q&A bar that's at the top of the webinar screen, and we'll answer all those that we have time for at the end of the session. So again, we're so glad that you took the time out of your day to join us for today's webinar. To get us started today, we're joined by William Collins, our Director of Technical Services, and our presenters today are going to be Jim Lindsay, our Solution Consultant and Business Analyst, and Robert Villafane, an Application Support Engineer. And with that, I'll kick it over to Jim to get us started.
Thank you, Mandy. All right, in today's webinar, we'll be covering deprecated features, new features spanning versions 20.3 to 22.2, additional topics around licensing and reporting, and then we'll take a sneak peek at version 23.2 for a future webinar, and then we'll wrap things up with question and answers. So let's get started with a few deprecated features. So we'll talk about 4 deprecated features, but for a complete list, you'll want to see the release notes for each version. And even though these features are going away, they've been integrated or replaced by new features. So the first deprecated feature we'll talk about is Application Extender Desktop and its import utilities. They're being replaced by Web Access Interface administrative module. Desktop and its importers still work as of version 22.2. However, they're not officially supported. Next would be utility service, which was the old way to interact with directory services such as Active Directory and acted as a compatibility layer. Now, there's no need for this as the service account, and if configured to do so and not restricted in the directory service, then it can interface with it directly. And the third deprecated feature is File Access Manager. Similar to utility services, it is an older document retention mechanism. Now, if licensed, retention is integrated more closely and can now be accessed directly from Web Access. And finally, the iSubmit query, which is part of the test launch interface and was a tool that could be used to prepare links with or without predefined credential data to be used at a later time. So an example of this would be, say, to send out a semi-public email memo or internal document review email, the replacement for which has to be written by a developer with the REST API. So that covers the 4 deprecated features. And we'll move on to our new features. And we'll talk about a few new features, but again, for a complete list, you can check the release notes for each version. So today we'll be showing you the component registration wizard. And this has been updated since version 16 to include more helpful error handling and tips. For example, if you are missing a configuration for a module such as, say, rendering server, it'll now show you, in addition to the usual error handling when testing credentials. And the second new feature we'll show you is the administrator editions. And some new features have their own menu items in admin now, and this simplifies the admin experience. And rolled up under administrative editions, we'll be showing you 3 or 4 features, and that would be indexing service and import utilities. And they're a part of administrative services module and are direct replacements for the index agent and desktop import utilities, and simplifies the installation experience. And then we'll move on to roles management. And server roles were added to allow less privileged users to safely access task-specific settings in admin. And prior to server roles, a limited user would need to be given full administrative rights to log into the admin site just for the purpose of, say, changing user privileges. Unfortunately, that user would also have access to server settings and configuration items. So now you can assign a user limited access to the admin site for the sole purpose of administrating users without seeing all administrative items. And finally, we'll show you the AppWorks workflow module integration, and we realize setting up an AppWorks server is much more involved and could probably be its own webinar. So we'll just take a few minutes to look at the admin menu. So my colleague Robert, I think will show you what these look like. So Robert, you want to take it from here? And I believe you're muted, Robert.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to take a look at our lab we have here. I'm going to use the render server as an example to show the changes for the component registration wizard. We're just going to head over to the server management menu and select the render service. And we're just going to clear the settings here. Save this configuration. It's going to complain, but we're going to save it anyway. You'll head over to your start menu in the OpenText folder to find the component registration wizard. And we'll go ahead and select the render server. Now, as you can see, since we removed the settings from the rendering server module in admin, when you run component registration wizard and attempt to register the render server module, component registration is now presenting us with a helpful hint that the module is not yet set up in admin. Okay, so we'll just go back to the admin site. We'll place our credentials back. And we'll save that configuration again. We'll head back to the component registration. I've already got it pinned here in the start menu. Okay, and we'll register again. And as you can see, with the credentials in place, the component registration wizard doesn't need to give us a hint the render server is not configured yet. And we'll just finish this registration. And that part's done. As far as the administrator additions, we'll take a look at the indexing service. There's an additional configuration menu for the indexing service now. This replaces some of the settings from the old index agent for talking to Explore. Okay, it has many of the settings index agent had, and you can enter the credentials for the AE account that you want to have the service access AE with, in addition to the service account that will leverage its Windows service. In application management and your data source, the queues are located here. And this is where you can create queues and enable queues for the indexing service. Again, similar to the old index agent, it was one of the tabs in that old program. And next is under monitoring. There's an additional page to monitor the indexing service. Okay, let's select that page. You can see how many documents have been successful or unsuccessful in being OCR'd or indexed. And now we'll take a look at the importing utilities. Those are under application management, inside the data source of your choice, and on your applications page. They're located here in a drop-down menu called Import Utilities. And you can see we've got the old importer names here. Let's take a look at the index image import. It looks much the same as the old desktop version. There's a lot of the same options choices. You can select your applications, your specifications for that application, and your import file, write a description, and so forth. And next is the roles management. Let's take a look at that menu. That's an all new menu to the admin site. You can select your data source with the user you want to administer. And as you can see, we have a bunch of different roles. I'm going to show you an example of a user manager type of role. Go in here and we can see that there is a user already added here, our test1 user. Right now I'm logged in as the systems administrator, so I can log out and show you what that looks like for this user. Okay, this user doesn't have global administrator privilege or is not in the role of global administrator, so we can't get logged in with that particular role. So let's switch to the user manager and try it again, see what we see. Okay, a much more simplified menu. Less items over here, less things that can get someone into trouble. You can select your data source, and as you can see, anything pertaining to users is now manageable here. I'll show you an example of being able to go into a user and administer their privileges. Okay. Let's see. Now the AppWorks workflow module integration. I'll need to be logged in again with the systems administrator account. That's under server management and then AppWorks server. So here you can see that if you've set up your AppWorks server, you'll have a place to fill in your AppWorks URL, secret key, and other settings. Now for additional topics. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Robert. All right. For additional topics, we're going to talk about licensing and reporting. With licensing, we'd like to talk a little bit about license and license pools. If you need to increase your license count, you will get an update license file from your vendor or reseller. Then you can split your total licenses and seats among your data sources using license groups. And lastly, with reporting, we'd like to show you a user audit report, and you can use this to track user activity if you have auditing enabled. And this can be really helpful in forensically determining recent actions of a user. All right, Robert, you want to show us what that looks like?
All right, we'll head back to our lab. And first up is licensing. So I'll go ahead and go to environment, select our license server. And now I'll open the link to our license server here and show that we have two license groups that we partition segments of our license seats to. Okay, so of our total 1,600 seats, we've allocated 800 to this particular group just for web access seats. Okay, you can allocate, you can clear it, or you can modify and change the amount of seats allocated to this group. And then you apply that group by heading back to the data sources section of environment, of the environment menu. You select the row that your data source is on, click the edit button, and go to the License Server tab. And you can see that I can limit my license server specifically to what's allocated in the data source group. And then save. Next is monitoring license servers. You can refresh the license usage verification window. You get to that by selecting the row instead of the link. You select the row that your license server is listed on, and then selecting verify. And you can see the user count, user total, expiration date, licensed products, and expiry dates, as well as refresh the page. And I'll show you an example of that incrementing. We'll log back in with our test user to increment our license seat count. And as you can see, we've incremented that total used, in addition to accounting for what is limited in the group that is assigned to limiting the license seats for that particular data source. Okay, and for the sake of troubleshooting, we'll head down to monitoring. We'll take a look at the PID table. PID and session tables can help you understand who and what services could be occupying a license seat. For example, if you know you are maxed out on licenses, but can't account for what could be using them, you might use this page to figure out that an importer is making a lot of connection or is stuck. You'll potentially be able to see which server it's from and be able to go and turn it off to free up license seats. Also note that you should probably set up your importer services with a dedicated AE native account for this exact tracking purpose. Otherwise, you may not be able to distinguish which account is the one taking all of the seats. Okay, and we'll go to the sessions page next. Sessions is only tracking web interactions such as web services and web access activity, but it can be helpful in figuring out who or what is connecting and utilizing seats from those particular interfaces. This is not necessarily a one-to-one connection to seat usage, but this can show you who and where the license seats could be pulled from. So in quick summation, the PID table specifically is for all database connectivity interactions for AppEnhancer, whereas sessions would be for web-based activity only. All right, so we'll head down to the, we'll head actually up one menu to the reporting menu, and we'll select our data source. And we'll take a look at the audit report page specifically. We are going to enter a user in here, that test user we were using earlier, to look up its user ID, and it will find it if we have it. And you just select Generate Report. This report can show some of the interactions like the ones listed here that our test user has done, such as logging in, viewing a document, and running queries. You can see things like the login event here means he logged in. The query exec is executing a query. Page view to open a document. Page insert to add a page to a document, and then a logout event. Additionally, the user effective permission report, which we'll select next here, can be used to find at a glance a potential privilege limitation or overreach a user may have. You might need to correct this to grant an ability or restrict a user respectively. It can help identify whether or not a user is supposed to have a privilege. It does so by enumerating all levels of privilege access and shows you the result. If the user in question ultimately doesn't have said privilege, then you know that it is being denied at one of those privilege levels. So let's use a test user account again. Let's take a look at what we see here. You search for a user, or you can do a blank search as well. See all users. We're just going to use our test user account and select the link for the user account right here under username. And we'll use AP as an example. This is pretty simple. This user effectively, after all calculations are made, has the ability to open documents with this display permission and to export and print documents with this print permission. Since we're using him as an example for the user security maintenance, he also has that privilege as well. Okay, finally, we're going to look at document level security. You can see we've got two different types of reports here. They just download as comma delimited spreadsheets or comma delimited value files. But I've got an Excel spreadsheet. I've got them in an Excel spreadsheet to make them easier to read here as an example. Each report tells us which applications have rules applied and what those rules are, but they are presented in a little different ways. Here's the second report, and here's the first report. Okay, you may find one more useful than the other, depending on the complexity of your rules and the scale of your AE environment. Now, we can take a look at these rules and figure out what they mean. This rule here is for any users in the application HR that are a part of the group test. If they come across a document with a field name or a field ID of last name that has a value of my last name, Villafane, that document will be inaccessible. Let's take a look at an example of that. We're already logged in here with our test user. We'll head to the HR application. We'll select the new query, and we'll just run a blank query. And you can see that there are no documents here with my last name in the field value of last name. Okay, so we'll log out of this user and we'll log in as administrator. And we'll run that same query. And you can see we have a document here with my last name in the value for the field value for last name. Okay, I think that covers our additional topics, Jim. Back to you.
Thank you, Robert. Let's see. So we're going to go on to our sneak peek at AppEnhancer 23.2. We'll be doing a webinar in the near future, but in the meantime, we wanted to give you a summary of some of its new features. All right, so the first new feature or enhancement is the recycle bin, and this adds an additional layer of management for deleted documents in AppEnhancer, which allows users with the recycle bin privilege to restore or permanently delete recycled documents for recycle bin enabled applications. This feature applies to application enhancer documents and AE document revisions. And the next enhancement is the licensing via OpenText directory services. So AppEnhancer 23.2 adds support for licensing via OTDS, the OpenText directory services, and SPS. And customers can now deploy OTDS to license AppEnhancer environments, allowing for high availability of licensing services, as well as deployment via containers. And then next we have hidden field improvements. So a new field flag has been added, allowing you to designate fields in AppEnhancer's applications as hidden while indexing a new document. And this allows AE to capture field data during document creation and indexing, which is not presented to end users unless they have administrator rights. And this is helpful for internal IDs or personally identifying information, PII, or other information which may not be relevant to non-admin AppEnhancer users. And the next enhancement would be validation mask for user stamps. So a new field flag has been added to create a user stamp, recording the user who indexed the document. And this is helpful for auditing and transparency. And the next enhancement in 23.2 is the field ID and app ID. They're now both displayed for the administrator when viewing field and app information in AppEnhancer Administrator. And this is helpful for admins using APIs to access the environment, or for admins running queries or reports against the AppEnhancer database. And then finally, there's the REST API enhancements. So now a Swagger interface has been added to the AppEnhancer REST services to assist developers when working with the AppEnhancer REST API.
That's great. Thanks, guys. That's really good information. Appreciate you walking everyone through that. We do have time here for some questions, so don't forget you can enter your questions in using the Q&A function on the toolbar at the top of the webinar window. But in the meanwhile, can you tell me, Jim, has the 23.2 release officially come out? And if so, when was that?
Sure, Mandy, that's a good question. Thank you. So version 23.2 was released in July 27th of this year.
Perfect. And Robert, have we done any upgrades to that 23.2 version yet?
Yeah. Yes, we've had a couple of clients upgraded successfully. Quick note about our process: we always do an internal quality control testing and vet the software through upgrades and integrations to make sure that the upgrade is ready to go live for customer environments.
Sounds good. So someone asked Robert, how do we free up a license?
Okay, let me head back to the admin site for that. Okay, you'll want to go to the monitoring section. This can be a part of the troubleshooting, but an example would be for removing someone from desktop or document manager, which would be handled in the PID table. You can find that user account by username or workstation. You can see what their status is, whether they're truly in a document or what they're doing, or if they're just idle. You can select that user account and select delete, and that should purge their license. And for web sessions, like I mentioned earlier, we'd go to the sessions page and select our data source here and find the user account. Select that user session and click terminate. All right.
Perfect. Someone asked, what is, I think, William, I think this is a question for you. What is replacing the application extender desktop?
Oh, yeah, good question. So it is true, as Jim mentioned earlier, the desktop has been deprecated by OpenText. As he also noted, the 20.4 installers still work with the current versions. So I get that there's some discontent with the diehard desktop users. So a couple notes. OpenText is working on a more unified client using smart UI frameworks, and that's actually on their roadmap for next year. Additionally, I would encourage users or administrators to get their users to try out the new versions of the web client. So I get, those of us that have been working with the product for many years, historically, the web client was not as feature rich or as responsive as the desktop client. But in the newer versions, the web client is actually more feature rich. And as OpenText continues to work on the enhancements to the rendering server, the response time is pretty fast now. So I would encourage that. So hopefully that answers your question.
William, I think I have another one for you here. Where can we get, the question is, where can documentation be obtained for the REST API in 23.2, especially the Swagger?
Yeah, sure. So our the knowledge base on our support site, we have articles that makes available all of the documentation for all of the different versions. So if you head over to support, or just head over to our website, revolutiondatasystems.com, and then go to the support tab, which will direct you to our support portal and look in our knowledge base.
Great, thank you. And Jim, you mentioned AppWorks a few minutes ago. Can you tell us what the AppWorks product is used for?
Yes, thank you for that question. So AppWorks is a replacement for Workflow Manager, and AppWorks is a powerful and flexible business process solution. And with just in-the-box configuration, you can have complex workflows that include, say, email notifications, access to supporting documents instantly when you're in the workflow. It also gives you powerful workflow visibility and auditing reporting.
Great, thank you. All right, well, we have time for more questions, and if anyone has more questions, we can wait for another second or two or minute or two if we want to answer any more questions. That was great. That was great content, guys. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we appreciate everyone's attendance today. I know that everyone's schedules can be really busy, so we appreciate everyone taking the time to come to today's seminar. As a reminder, we'll be sending out this recording after the session, and we're happy to answer any additional questions that you have. You can email support at the email address here on the screen, and we'll get those questions routed to the right team and get them answered for you. And thank you again for coming to today's webinar. We appreciate your time. Thanks so much.